Welcome to the Sobity Chat podcast. If you are new, and welcome back if you are a regular and a part of the fam, my name is Fatima, and the Sobity Chat is a self-care community and podcast designed to empower women through faith-infused resources, mental health support, coaching, and wellness events. So before we dive in, let's chat about a few ways that you can support the show. The first way is by subscribing wherever you are listening. The second way is to share with a friend. If you think that this episode or this show will provide value to their lives, please go ahead and drop them that link. The third way is to rate and review via iTunes or wherever you're listening, but iTunes is probably the most primary source where my listeners come from. So make sure you head over there and leave a comment about why you like the show and leave a rating. And then finally is by submitting your questions via email, which is sobtchat@gmail.com, my personal Instagram, Fatima_farmer, or by sending a voice message right here on Anchor if that's where you're listening. So without further ado, let's get into today's show. Sobity Chat. In today's episode, I'm really excited because I am interviewing very special guests and a licensed professional who is going to be dropping some gems with us on the show today. I'm going to be interviewing Krystal Jackson, who is a licensed professional therapist. Is that the exact title, or am I slaughtering that?
No, yeah. So I call
Okay.
myself a therapist, but my license is in professional counseling.
Okay, there we go. Licensed professional counseling, and she is a therapist. She's a Black woman, and she is here on the show today to grace us with her presence and to drop some gems for us. So I'm just going to share a little bit about Krystal, and then I'm going to pass it over to you to just tell a little bit about why this is important to you. But Krystal is a professional that has been helping women remove self-judgment and embrace their strengths as they embark on their healing journey. She's worked in the mental health field since 2008, and she received a license in professional counseling in 2011. In addition to providing therapy, she also has had the opportunity to educate young women and professionals as an adjunct professor. She's the founder, owner, and lead therapist of Simply Being Wellness Counseling in Farmington, Connecticut. And she helps professionals firsthand that are going through unique challenges, caregivers, and really just with understanding the importance of having a self-care plan, healthy boundaries, intentional relaxation. And I spoke with Krystal once before we decided to record this podcast, and she's just a delight. So welcome, Krystal, to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. I'm super excited, as I said before, to just share with you all the things that I am learning, not only in my profession and as a therapist, but also about myself, because I think that is that's the most important thing, is that how I'm learning as well on my healing journey and being able to connect that with other people.
Yeah, so I would actually love to start there. I would love to know, what is your story? Like, what led you to want to become a therapist, and why is this important to you?
Yeah, so I remember I must have been in high school, and I took like a sociology class, and I just remember thinking, oh, this is super interesting, just how people connect and why we think in certain ways. And probably from my earliest memory, I remember like people easily connecting with me, and like me being younger and just older folks kind of just speaking to me or asking my advice, even though I was younger. And so that kind of made me feel like, okay, well, maybe this is something that I should go with. And even though I didn't have the full understanding of it, even like during college, I majored in psychology. And so they teach you a whole bunch of things there, but I didn't really get a good sense of what it meant to be a therapist until I went into my master's program. And so my master's program focused on mental health counseling. So basically I went into the program to be trained to be a therapist. So from the first semester, everyone was assigned a student, an undergrad student to work with, so that they can kind of practice their skills, while also understanding like all the complexities that go into us really being a good therapist. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, I just for some reason didn't get assigned to be with someone. So I really had to rely a lot on peer support, and then as well, like kind of crafting my own understanding, just in like, seeing what's displayed on TV and paying attention in class and asking those clarifying questions to really gain an understanding. But I can say probably now, 10 plus years into this, I feel I am at the best place as far as who I am as a person and also my confidence as being a therapist. And so I think that's important to say because we all have different life experiences. And the more life experiences, I believe the more life experiences we have and the more of the self work that we do as therapists, then the better therapists we're able to become.
Mm. I love that. I love that. I think it's so beautiful that you are so honest about your journey and how, like, although you are a therapist and you're helping others heal, that it's a process for you too. And I would actually love to maybe hear if you can think of a time or a story in your life just where where you may have felt like you were at your lowest, or a point where you realized that you had to mentally or spiritually or emotionally or all three kind of turn and change the path that your mental health was on?
Yeah, I feel like this has been really ongoing for me. I would say definitely within the last 4 to 5 years, where I really became cognizant of a lot of the patterns that I was having, that I was kind of going through, and just understanding that I didn't want to continue with those patterns. And I think more so in the last year or two, I felt more of a sense of urgency to really be kind of savage about how I'm doing that work for my legacy. I'm like, okay, I am actively healing things within myself that I can see is also going, across the board. It's going to me and my siblings, is going, back to my mom, with us being able to have different type of conversations and being able to really hear each other. And I also am seeing how that is with the next generations. I don't have children right now, but at least with my nephews who I'm close with, I can see how my work is also allowing them to feel compelled to, okay, we don't want to just avoid conflict, but maybe we can start to communicate, or we can start to name feelings and things like that. So I can say I can really see a lot of the seeds that I planted as far as starting my healing work, or really being intentional about that. I say that because we're always healing.
Right.
It's not linear. So I say that like this is my phase of this part of my healing journey, because I've actually been super intentional about just understanding myself a lot better than in previous years. So, and so in 2015, I was diagnosed with fibroids and endometriosis. Well, with a fibroid, excuse me. So I had a really, I knew that I had a fibroid. It runs in my family. There was a change in my cycle. So I went to my doctor and I said, hey, I'm pretty sure it's a fibroid. And so I ended up having surgery. They found endometriosis, and just that whole, I would say, 2 years of just physically paying so much attention to what was going on in my body, that really made me kind of slow down and see, okay, well, what are the things that I was doing that was contributing to this? And looking back, I can see how I was like super depressed and down during that time. But my friends either did not understand what that looked like what that meant. When I was saying, I was asking for help, I was telling people I'm not, oh, hey, this is really bothersome, I'm really focused on this. And looking back, I could see how I was sharing with them so much. But because people are so used to me being the sounding board, because people are, I really do the strong, I got this, even if I'm down, I make that look really good. I do that like down stuff very well. So I found that even just now, I have to like tell people, listen, I'm struggling. I need your help in X, Y, or Z way. And so that kind of really propelled me on this part of my journey. Also, in the midst of that health crisis for me, I also experienced a breakup. So I had a breakup, and then I also lost one of my really good friends. We ended our friendship. And so I had all these losses that I was trying to navigate and process while like living at home and like navigating the crisis and kind of the emotional labor that was happening in my household. And so to start working on that in 2017, I basically said, I'm going to get up. I'm not going to keep allowing myself to feel down about this, but whatever it is that I need to do, I need to be intentional about doing those things. And so I started reading just different books about people's healing journeys. And I hope I'm answering your question.
You are.
Okay. I started reading books. I intentionally read books about other people's healing journeys because I wanted to see how they were able to come back from, the depths of whatever their experience was. And so I read things like Wild and Eat, Pray, Love and Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes, and just these people who were saying, okay, I have to, in order for me to get out of the space, I have to be intentional about it, while also understanding that me being in that space was also teaching me something.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like God really he can kind of stop me in my tracks, especially when there's something that goes on physically with me, because I'm so used to just like kind of soldiering through.
Yeah.
And I keep an insane schedule, which I realize has really been something that I have done to kind of keep me from like being by myself and being quiet at some points. And so there is this line for me between like ambition and like intellectualizing or kind of like avoiding by being distracted by stuff. And so for me to do better with that, I have to be mindful of, am I distracting? Am I avoiding right now? Or am I, is this something that is really sparking my creative muscle? And so I started that healing journey. I was reading the books. 27 spring, I started a blog. It was called Simply Being Chrissy, which is a nickname that people call me. They call me Chrissy. And it was because I felt like, what would happen if I learned how to simply be? And so I wanted to just really strip it down and say, who am I and what is it that I desire? And was I choosing things that was not for me? And maybe that was why there were certain, relationships that maybe I didn't need to be in, or certain things that I was kind of tolerating that was unnecessary. And so I really like stripped down, like I moved out on my own, which was definitely a blessing and necessary. And I would say about a year and a half into that journey, I started with my first therapist. And she helped me to kind of see like some of the patterns, the ways that I was I'm a fixer, or I wasn't actively communicating myself and my needs, and how I had kind of gotten people used to me being the person that they could go to versus me saying, hey, I need your help. I would be honest and say like that's sometimes still a struggle for me, but I'm doing a lot better with that. And so that really is what started me, because I didn't like the way that I felt. And I think now I can get a little bit more, because of that experience, I'm more mindful of when I start to have a similar experience where maybe I start to get mentally exhausted or I feel down. And then I can start to ask myself now, okay, what is it that I need?
Wow. I think you mentioned so many good points, but something that I want to kind of highlight, because this is definitely resonating for me. Like so much of how you described just in your personality of like almost just like being the strong friend and the one that's like always offering advice and being supportive, like carrying that mask almost. And it's just so beautiful to hear how, you reach this point in your life where you were almost like forced to put it down, like you were forced in some ways to put that down and to just really become intentional about your journey. I think something that I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about is that you mentioned God a few times in your journey. And I would just love to hear what was your relationship like with God during that time? And do you feel like that situation deepened it or tested it, or how did it evolve because of all that you were going through during that time?
I grew up Christian. I would say I've always had a discerning spirit. So it's really super easy for me to feel when things are kind of not right in the atmosphere. And I'm sure you and your listeners kind of understand what I mean by that. And I can feel that with other people as well, especially people I'm close to. So I think that there was an inclination for me to take on some of that for other people, because I was getting, the downloads or the kind of the understanding of what was happening for other people. And I think in that time, I really began to understand that that wasn't so much what my job is. My job isn't to take it for them, but my job is to assist them along the way, and also allow people to do that for me. And I think that, like I said, I can be super stubborn, intellectual, and I just realized that God always is sending me messages. And for me to pay attention, there has to be something kind of drastic sometimes. And usually it shows up in that physical manifestation or in a dream, in some way that I can kind of, that's how he's going to speak to me to let me know, like, hey, you might want to take a step back and maybe see what is going on here. And so I would say I never blamed him. There were points that I was angry, but not so much at him, but just because of that was my human experience. Like that was the way I needed to process through things. Like I look back through my journals, and a lot of my journals from the time is really just prayers. It's really just me talking to God. It's not brain dumps. It's not as so much like me processing, but it's that maybe that was my way of processing and speaking with him. And so sometimes it's like I go to pray and I don't have a clue what to say, but I can open my journal and just start writing. And then I'm like, I'm in a prayer and I don't even know it, So I would say now, because of those experiences, my understanding of God and like the humanness of Jesus and how he really understood who we were because he lived as a human, it helped me to have a different understanding of him versus instead of being like this unattainable thing, being, I know like I can talk to him as that friend that I need to listen to me, so that maybe there were aspects of myself that I wasn't comfortable in sharing with other people. And I think that there were sometimes and me avoiding and distracting myself was also a way for me to kind of hide from him in some sense. And so I think that I started to, because I had to strip those things away, because I had to pay attention to my body. And that's very spiritual, like what we're fueling our body with and how we're moving. And, I got into like yoga. Now my practice is different, how I start my day and end my days. And I just really started to have a different understanding of what did I need spiritually because of those experiences.
Yeah, I think I love that you shared that because it shows the connection between how like our mental health is directly connected to our spiritual health and our emotional health and our physical health. It's all tied in together. And I would actually love for, like, you shared some things throughout your story, but I think maybe for, let's say if there's a listener that, maybe they're in that space where they are distracting themselves, right? So they're not super in tune with their body, or they're not super in tune with God right now. Because I think we all have those moments where like sometimes we're just not the most in tune as we could be. Or if they're completely new to it, what are some indications that, or signs that people can become aware of that maybe it's time to start their personal healing journey?
Yeah, I find that we have to really, I think Oprah calls it, listen to the whispers. So the things that are really, we're noticing repeated messages popping up. I think that that's really where we need to pay attention. And also, a lot of times we don't like to be quiet.
Yeah.
And, we're kind of used to having, looking on social media or having music playing, or, I'm good for listening to a podcast or an audiobook. And so to be intentional about having quiet time and being able to just sit with ourselves. I spoke about doing yoga. That was very important piece for me because there was a time where I couldn't just sit and be quiet and I couldn't meditate. And so when I was doing yoga and the actual practice of that, I was able to be intentional about breathing and paying attention to what was happening in my body and doing that check-in in that way. And so now in my morning routine, so to speak, it's something that I can do within 10 minutes or something that I can do over an hour. Yeah. And, usually what I do is I don't just hop out of the bed. I start my day by just quietly sitting in the bed for a few moments and just paying attention to what's happening in my environment. What am I hearing? What's happening in my body? Is there pain anywhere, tension anywhere? Yeah. And just doing kind of like a check-in from like head to toe. And then, usually I say a prayer or some type of gratitude statement. And then I can kind of get going with my day. And so I saw a really good thing that said, I'm taking this from somebody. This is not mine. But do your morning routine in 15 minutes. So like 5 minutes for prayer or meditation, 5 minutes for a devotional, and then like 5 minutes for journaling. And I think when we do that, when we can wake up for 15 minutes earlier and just get those pieces in. And that to me was important, to do the self check-in. Yeah. How are you doing first? Like I call it checking in and checking on, right? How my checking in with myself is saying, how are you doing? What's happening? What are you feeling? What's going on in your body? Do you need something today? Do you need to talk to anyone? Can you get something that's going to make you, add a little happiness or joy to your day? So when we check in on ourselves, and that I find that's a piece. But then the second part of that is checking on. So there may be things that we actually need to take actionable steps on, and that's the checking on piece, right? So now I said, what do I need? And then I need to decide, are there things within my control or things that I need to do to move forward to be able to put those things in action? And so those are kind of like my quick tips for when we don't want to, we may not have the time in our schedule to do something that's really, in depth, but that's really simple. You can do that throughout the day, right? Like, how you doing, sis? You feeling okay? Do you need some water? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Right. And I think just that gets us into the habit of being more aware of what's going on with us in relation to our environment.
Yeah. And it's like, I love that you shared such practical tips, because I think sometimes self-care can seem like just so elaborate at times that it's like, oh, I have to have time to do this. It has to be a luxury. It has to be this thing that I like make space for. And it can be that, but it can also be, like you described, a simple question to yourself. What do I need right now? It can just be water, it can be a nap. It could be taking a walk. So I love that you just made that so simple, because I think that, it kind of lowers that barrier for some people who use the excuse of, I don't have time to like do this thing. And also that, I think that's how we prevent those moments that, like you shared, where the physical manifestation shows up and it causes everything in your life to come to a halt. Like, we can prevent that a lot of the times just by doing the daily maintenance of checking in with ourselves and checking on, as you mentioned. I love that. So I want to actually shift gears a little bit and now talk about like shifting from your personal journey and talking more about working with a therapist from a therapist perspective, because I've shared my experience on the podcast before, but it's from like, the client side, and I've shared on what it's like online working with a therapist, and I've shared my experience in person. But I would love to get your expertise on how people can go about approaching finding a therapist, and like some of the benefits of working with a therapist. So I think maybe let's start with, from a therapist, what would you say are some of the main benefits, and why all of us should be seeking some type of counseling in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. As a therapist, I am someone who is not a part of your daily life, right? I'm going to be objective. I'm hearing your side, but also it's my duty to sit in that healing space with you. Even the mess, it's my duty to sit there with you. And I think that that's what people really need to get, is that it's not my responsibility to judge or to place blame or anything like that. It's my job to help you as you're understanding your experience. And so that can be helpful for anybody. I mean, I definitely, I feel super honored to be able to do that for other people. And sometimes it's still a little, I shouldn't say this, but sometimes it feels a little surprising when I'm like, they're like, oh my goodness, you've helped me so much. And I'm thinking to myself, we haven't even got to the good stuff yet. Like, we still got more to do, But it's just amazing how within, a couple sessions, a lot of people do say that they do find some relief. Now, don't get me wrong. Healing can be, I say healing is a constant unfolding, so it's not going to be the most comfortable experience. And I can say, there were times when I went to therapy and I was like, who wants to do this? Like, why would people put themselves through this? And I can say that as being on the other side of the couch, that really gave me an insight into what the experience is like for my clients. And so I'm grateful that I sought that for myself, but it was also necessary for me as a therapist, because, we are exposed to so many different things on a daily basis. And I think it can be helpful to kind of shed and manage my energy as well by having a therapist. But so yeah, we all need that safe space to get to know ourselves. And that's where we can do that on the couch or in the chair or through the screen, however you're going to get it done. I think the most important aspect of therapy is that relationship between the therapist and the client.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that that can be a little bit difficult for people sometimes, because when folks come and see me, they're speaking to a complete stranger, right? And so I need to allow people to go through whatever their process is as we are building that relationship and that rapport. And if you look at in how folks build their relationships in their personal lives, you can kind of see it really play out in the therapy room. So yeah.
That's true. There's been so many times where I'm like talking to my therapist and just certain things will come up that are either she'll say something that maybe reminds me of someone in my life, or I will start, like, if we're talking about something, it's like, it's almost like I am like, I don't want to say forgetting, like I know that I'm still there with my therapist, but it's like I'm like, especially if I'm like reenacting a situation, because sometimes we're so in our minds that we feel like we're reliving it, and I like
Yeah.
stop for a second. I'm like, oh wait, like this is my therapist I'm talking to, not the person that did X, Y, and Z, or not the person that caused me to feel this emotion that I'm expressing. So I think that's so interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on, like, what can people expect? Like you mentioned, you're coming in, you're talking to a complete stranger. So what can people expect? Like if they've never done therapy before, it's intimidating. I know I was terrified the first time I went. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know.
Yes,
This woman's
it
going to
definitely
like do
can
all
be.
my dirty laundry. So kind of walk us through, like, what can we expect in our first couple of sessions with the therapist?
Yeah, so usually like definitely the first one or two is really going to be just getting to know you. I'm going to be asking questions to see what your current needs are, and kind of what is maybe their stressors or things that are going on, depression, anxiety, or other issues. And so I'm really going to try to get an understanding of what that current experience is like for you. And it's not usually until, yes, you might reference some previous life experiences during that time that may be related to the current stressor, but that's really what we're trying to do. We call it an intake assessment. So what we're doing is just gathering information, and we're building rapport. We're answering questions. We're, just setting that space and that tone so that we can, after probably third or fourth session, really begin to do a lot of the work. So sometimes people come in the first session and they're like, oh, I made it in. And they're so hopeful, and, they want to understand like maybe what they're looking forward to really resolving things. But we're humans, so we process over time. So 1 or 2 sessions, yes, it may be helpful, but I don't know that it's always going to completely resolve whatever the initial issue was.
Yeah.
So don't expect that you're going to meet. I always kind of recommend to people that you may not jive with the therapist right away, and also trust your intuition. If you don't feel safe, or you don't feel that you have a connection with the therapist, or maybe that therapist is not they don't have the specialty to meet your needs, because we all have different specialties. Then, I would say definitely maybe ask for a referral and communicate that. But because the therapeutic relationship, that's what we call it, the relationship that's being built between the therapist and the client, because that tends to mirror a lot of our interpersonal relationships, then I would really encourage people to communicate if there are any discomfort or any concerns and things like that, definitely within those first sessions.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that's definitely a big misconception I had when I first went in. Like when I signed up for therapy, it was during a really difficult time. So I was expecting like, okay, I'm going to do this and like I'm going to feel better. And I remember leaving and I was like, I don't feel better. I feel like I just talked to a stranger and we got to know each other. Like it felt almost like a first date. Like I was just like, okay.
Yes.
But I was like, everything I felt, I still felt it, because we couldn't dive in yet, because like you said, we were just building that rapport with each other. But, I didn't know that at the time. So I was kind of like, is this how it's supposed to work? Like, is it supposed to be like this at first? But I'm glad I stuck with it, because now I see, the benefits of doing it long term. Are there any other misconceptions that maybe you've seen or that or people have talked to you about, of like they expected it to be one way but it turned out different? And what are some of your thoughts around just like managing those expectations?
Yeah, so a lot of times people think therapists are one size fit all,
Mm-hmm.
and we like I said, we have different specialties. My focus, I really love doing a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, but my style with it is going to be, it matches my personality, right? So you're not going to you may find someone else that does CBT, but they're not going to do it in the same way that I do it. If you had a traumatic experience, there may be someone who's certified to provide certain tools, maybe like EMDR or DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy, and maybe they're certified to do those things, and you're going to get a different experience from that therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I want people to kind of also take stock of what their needs are. And also be transparent about that to the therapist. Like, this is what I'm expecting to get, because that's essentially what we're calling the treatment plan, right? This is what we're working on. These are the symptoms of the problems. These are the steps we're going to take to try to resolve it. And so, your input, the client's input is just as important. It's not my treatment. It's not for me to come up with, it's for us to do it collaboratively. So I think I want people to understand that you're not coming to see me or any therapist to get advice. Yes, we're experts, but we're not experts about you and your individual life experience. And so a lot of times people go because, they might have that misconception that, oh, she's going to, or he's going to tell me what to do. And it's like, no, we're going to help you try to find your answers. Can we give some guidance sometimes? Or, maybe ask some clarifying questions that would help a person gain some insight for themselves? Yes. But if you have a therapist telling you specifically what to do, like, girl, cut him off, or, that's usually not, this is not what we do. Now, don't get me wrong. We all, like I said, we're humans. We have to check ourselves as well. So the same way there may be things that we say that are triggering for you, there may be things that the client says that could be triggering for us as well. But I am trained to be mindful of that. I'm trained to understand if I have someone that kind of, shares a similar life experience or comes in with something that I may be struggling with as well, right? I have to put Krystal on the back burner and be aware that this is not for me to have that shared experience, but for me to hold space with someone else. Oh. So, yeah. So I think, so those three things are usually what I hear the most.
Yeah, that's really, really huge. It's like making that distinction of that I think your therapist is not there to give you advice. I think that is a huge misconception that a lot of people have. Is like, I've told my friends before, I'm like, if your therapist is giving you advice, I actually don't know if they're a good therapist, because I think some of the best sessions that I've had personally are when, like you said, it's just through asking clarifying questions, holding space, validating what I'm saying, and like in guiding me, versus saying like, well, you should do this or you should do that. It's like, that is actually like maybe a life coach, but not
right.
So I'm glad that you highlighted that.
Yeah, and there's some therapists who do coaching as well. Mm-hmm. And so, again, that might be what the person's need is at that time. And maybe they thought that they needed a therapist. And that's not to say that I think that there are definitely periods in our life that therapy is going to be the direction that we need to go. But there may be other like goal oriented, like I'm looking to take these steps that a coach might be more helpful with. Right. And like I said, there are therapists who do both. Mm-hmm. So your therapist or you as the client should be able to say, you know what, I thought I was looking to get into X, Y, or Z, but actually I'm thinking I need help in this way. And so, like I said, I want people to feel encouraged to be able to, advocate for themselves and share what the needs are. But it's also my job to notice if that's where it's going, and to ask those questions to see if, is this something that you're trying to distance yourself from, or, because everybody's not always ready. There may be things that I see as a therapist and I'm listening and I'm like, okay, let's see where we can go with this. Can I move in this direction? And maybe the person is not just ready yet, right? So then I have to kind of I have to decide, how do I push in this way? Do I allow that person to have their process? And we're always thinking, because we're trying to understand what that person's experience is. And so we have to understand by asking those questions and seeing where a person is, then we can kind of get a sense of, are they ready to move in this direction just yet? And I've had people come back to me because they were like, yeah, I wasn't ready a year ago, but I'm ready to get into this now. And I can see that they may have done some work with outside of the therapy room, because most of the work is outside of the therapy room. Usually it's 1 hour, 2 hours a week, for some people a couple hours a month. And that's so minute compared to the many other hours in the week that a person has. So
Right.
we only have that amount of time, and so the majority of the work is going to be done outside of the room. So when you come in the room, we need you to like bring yourself ready. And if you're not, that's fine too, because we can work with that. So I don't think you don't need to be like in a certain way to be, oh, I got therapy on lock. We want you just to come in and be willing to do the work.
Right. And I think it's also really important to highlight what you mentioned around like it's a collaboration. So like not walking in expecting like your therapy to like fix things, but like you're coming there saying, this is what I feel like I need. I think setting that tone will be so helpful for a lot of people when they're starting out with this new experience, if it's something that they haven't done before. Something else that like kind of a side note that you mentioned that I'm just so fascinated by is like you shared in the beginning that you've always been like very discerning. And I'm curious to know if that is something that you feel like, working as a therapist, you've just naturally over time, like because you have that gift, you've been able to kind of like activate it more, or if that's something that you actually learn through your practice of becoming a therapist, of how to discern like when do you push a client to go deeper, or when do you kind of ease up and just allow them to process. Like, because to me, honestly, I'm so fascinated by this, and I think that that's such a skill in the moment to have
Mm-hmm.
this person sitting in front of you, and they could be experiencing a range of emotions, but you have to make a decision of how to move forward in the session like very quickly. So I'm just curious to know, like, what is your process when doing that?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of skill and also just instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's helpful because of the relationship. That's what makes it super, because you have to have that trust with my client. Needs to trust that I'm going to share this space. They need to trust that they can be vulnerable. They need to trust that this is, even if that they can be okay with showing the ugly parts of themselves. And so I need to be able to, it is kind of like a dance. I really, if I overthink it, then I find those are the times where then I may feel like I fail. But it's always up to chance. I don't know if any question is actually going to work. I don't know if that's really going to push a person to, forward. I don't know that. But I try,
Yeah.
because, and like I said, that's the importance of having the relationship mixed with the skill and the instinct. And that has been learned over time. I've worked with many different populations. I started my work with people who were in recovery from substances, from drugs and alcohol. And there was a lot of distrust with people, a lot of trauma, especially with people who were like me, right? Social workers or people who were supposed to be helpful. And so I had to figure out, how can I connect? And so that's the most important piece for me first, to be able to connect. And then I can kind of say, with that connection, then I can say, okay, let me try this. I think this is going to work. But it's in the moment.
Wow, that's so fascinating to me. So I would love to, especially with the just where we are right now. Like, for those who don't know, we're recording this in the midst of coronavirus doing its thing out there in the world, and there's just a lot happening and a lot of things that can really impact our mental health right now. So I would love to hear from you. The what do you think the importance is right now in like taking care of our mental health, and just different affordable ways that we can do that, whether it is finding a therapist or other options? What are some things that come to mind for you as ways that we can really step up our mental health practices right now?
Yeah, so I actually did a post the other day, and I just said, breathe, you know, because when we're breathing, when we have breath, we have life. And that's like one of my favorite things to just meditate on. If I have breath, I have life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's in the midst of this chaos, and for someone like myself and many others who really are swayed by the energy of kind of the atmosphere, it can be very overwhelming. And so I want to encourage people to, number one, be mindful of what you need and make sure you're doing those check-ins. So you might want to limit, what you're engaging in with social media, things like that. There's also a lot of people who have switched over, being therapists or wellness professionals, switched over from doing in-person sessions to online. And so just being mindful that may be how we can get our needs met and get that support at this time. But as far as options for therapy, there's a few different ways.
Before we dive any further into this episode, I want to quickly tell you about an app that I've been using for the last couple of years to assist with my mental health journey called Faith Counseling. Faith Counseling is a solution for people seeking traditional mental health counseling who would prefer hearing from the perspective of a Christian. If you're seeking a mental health professional who is a practicing Christian, Faith Counseling may be a great option for you. The best part is that you can start communicating in under 24 hours. Just a few things to note about Faith Counseling. This is not a crisis line and it's not self-help. This is professional counseling done securely online with real therapists. There's a broad range of expertise in the counseling network, which may not be locally available in some areas. So keep in mind when you're booking your sessions. The service also is available to clients worldwide, and one of the great benefits is that you can log into your account at any time and send a message directly to your counselor in real time. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly or phone sessions so you won't ever have to worry about sitting in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. Faith Counseling is also committed to facilitating great matches, so they make it easy and free to change your counselors if needed. To be honest, while the times that I've been using this app, I have changed my counselors multiple times and I don't feel guilty about it because it's super easy to do. And also, you kind of have to view it like dating. You may not get it right on the first try, and some people you just may not match with. But the fact that you can easily, literally in less than a day, and change your counselor for free is a great option that Faith Counseling offers. Another thing that you should consider about Faith Counseling is that it is way more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available to those in need. Faith Counseling wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website and read some of their testimonials, or check out my other episodes where I go into depth about what it's like to work with a therapist to learn more about my experience. And visit Faith Counseling to join over 500,000 people who are taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. For a special offer and to get 10% off your first order with Faith Counseling or your first month with Faith Counseling, use my link getfaithful.com/soulbeauty. Again, to get 10% on your first month of services with Faith Counseling, click the link in the description or type into your browser getfaithful.com/soulbeauty. SOULBEAUTY. Getfaithful.com/soulbeauty. Thank you, Faith Counseling, for the opportunity to collaborate on this amazing service. And check it out if this is something that is resonating with you. Okay, back to the episode.
A few different ways. If you're looking for a therapist, one of the largest directories is Psychology Today, psychologytoday.com. And you can search by location. You can search by what insurance do they take. You can search by their specialty. So that's one of the largest directories. But also Therapy for Black Girls is a great directory. So if people are specifically looking for a therapist of color, I know most of my clients, I would say about half of my clients have found me on there, which is very important to people of color, especially Black women, to find someone who is understanding of what our experiences are as a Black person. That is, they don't always need to be white, because there are some, woke white people. So my therapist is not a Black woman, but she is understanding of my experience and also willing to learn. So I found that has been very helpful for me. But as far as directories, those are the main two. I would also say to check if you're a college student. The counseling office on the college campus is definitely a great option to use. Anywhere you go, we have to hold your privacy, right? So I think that this is a really great time for people, because therapy is so embraced by this generation and the younger generations. And so this is like a beautiful time, because you can say, hey, I went to my therapist today, right? And you can say that without feeling like there's something wrong or that shame. So, college campuses, through your employer, their EAP, they usually offer some limited sessions. I think it's usually about 2 to 4 sessions. Sometimes it's a little bit more, where they will actually pay for the session and you don't have to come out of pocket. So those are some options. But also you have other things like Talkspace, which people can do therapy through text message or online, and usually at a cheaper rate. But also Open Path Collective. They also have people who are on their directory who specifically have what we call sliding scale options. So sliding scale is basically a reduced fee, either dependent upon the client's income or whatever the therapist has chosen to list their fee as. So, and that could be as cheap as, $25 a session. Sometimes it's $50. It really just depends. But that's a good option to look for reduced sessions as well. I would also encourage people to, if you're interested in working with a specific therapist, ask them as well about their sliding scale or reduced fee options, because they may have a pro bono session that they have set aside. They may have a few sliding scale sessions available. So you want to ask the therapist that you're working with and see if they offer those things as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I can actually speak to a few of those different things. One of them you guys have probably already heard if you're listening to this episode, because it's in collaboration with Faithful Counseling, which is one of those online tools. But the other one I wanted to speak to is you just said the name. It's Open
Path Collective.
Yes, Open Path Collective. So I started initially with the online therapy. That was like my first sessions. And then when I was able to afford in-person sessions, I started going in person when I lived back in New Jersey. And then when I moved here, I was like so grateful to find a therapist through that site. It's a black woman. She's a Christian, and she has the sliding scale. And I was so just amazed, because I didn't know that was even an option. So I would definitely recommend, like, if you're listening and you're like, I need therapy, I need to start this healing journey, but I'm like really struggling with where to start, check out those resources, because they are extremely beneficial. And I think that in person is probably my favorite way to get therapy sessions, but there's so many options available. And also thank you for sharing like the free resources, because I think a lot of people sometimes don't know about like your job offering it or college campuses offering it. So those are great places to start if you're just like, I need something and I can't afford, especially with what's happening right now in the world. I know finances is like a concern for a lot of people right now, and therapy has for so long been viewed as like a luxury, but it really, in my opinion, should be a necessity. It should just be a part of your basic healthcare practices, like the same way you go to the dentist and the doctor and get your eyes checked. Like, I think that this should be included in it. So check out those resources.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Mental health is definitely it's a part of the medical model. Yeah. So, I mean, even burnout was just listed as a major diagnosis. So if we're going to say those things, depression, anxiety, burnout, and, beyond are medical issues, then we need to, even if you don't meet criteria for a diagnosis, I think that we also can say that there are times, especially like now, where there is rightfully so increased stress or increased anxiety. And so, it is helpful to speak with someone. I would never want someone being unable to afford it as a reason why they didn't go and seek options. And don't get me wrong, it's not like you're gonna find the right person and everything's gonna fall into place. There is work to finding a therapist. I mean, I emailed probably 10 people before I got connected with my therapist. And so it does take time. I want people to be mindful of that, because we only have a certain amount of sessions like that we can offer during the week. So I know that people are wanting to get in. So you might want to look at as well. There are other spaces. I was telling Fatima before we got on the call that I have noticed that there are people who are offering sessions, free calls, as a check-in, or meditations, or people are, definitely podcasts give you a lot of good tools. There are workbooks. There are other ways where if you find that you can't get in the therapy room right now, you can still start doing the work.
Yeah.
So I want people to just be mindful of that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'll also, in this episode, I'll include some resources that I found. There's this one particular collective called Black Girl Magic that just dropped a kind of like a document, a resource guide full of podcasts, books, downloads, like all the things. So I'll be sure to include that in the show notes if anyone wants to check those out. So as we wrap up, I would love to, one, just give you the floor to share if there's any like final words that you have, especially for people who, I'm hoping that this episode, one, can give people a little insight, of course, into like who you are and why, like what you're doing and why you're doing it, but also like encouraging those who still may be on the fence about therapy or just like unsure about it, to really give it a shot and to just start to experience some of the benefits that you and I both shared in this episode. So do you have any like final thoughts or anything that you would share for the person that maybe they're still kind of like, I don't know about this, or, I'm still feeling a little hesitant. Do you have any thoughts that you can share with those people in particular?
Yeah, I mean, people have been seeking counsel since the beginning of time. We have always asked other people for their guidance or for their advice. And there's so many references to it in the Bible, so many references in different, and with our historical figures, that is our inclination, right? We are humans. We want to connect. And I think that we also there's a need to really understand our experiences. And so therapy really helps us to get to know ourselves better. So I want people to be encouraged. I feel like I was able to do more or be more intentional about learning about myself because I had someone to help, to guide, to ask me certain questions. I can do it on my own. This is different than having a friend, right? And the whole thing is to take those questions and take what I'm learning in the sessions and then to go back and reflect and see how is it playing out in my life. Right, and do some reflection on that. But this is different than asking a friend for advice. This is different than having a listening ear, right? This is someone who is actually, helping to process in real time as things are going on, but also giving purposeful tools to as we are moving on the healing process. So, like I said, I started this by asking myself, what would happen if I learned how to simply be, if I learned how to just be present and to accept myself without judgment. And that's how it started for me, to say, well, why am I so unkind? Right. And just really shifting that voice for myself. So I want everyone to really understand that we are the ones that are in charge of helping ourselves to live this life, and that we have been gifted with people like therapists, the same way we've been gifted with doctors and dentists and other type of professionals, right, to help us. And so would you not go to a doctor if you had an ailment, a physical ailment, right? So we would go to a therapist with our emotional ailments. And so that's why we're here. So I want to encourage people to understand that, that's what we're here to help folks with.
Yes, amen to that. I talk about that all the time. I'm so happy you mentioned that. I'm sure my audience is like sick of me talking about that, of how like we have to, especially as Christians, like view therapists in the same way that we would view a general doctor. So thank
Absolutely.
you for that.
I mean, look at Jesus. Jesus went to John and asked him some questions. I mean, we need counsel. That there's so many references. So I always tell people, God gifted us with that. He gifted us with therapists, with someone who would be non-judgmental. And I think that, and the way that we can kind of seek him for that, he has gifted us in human form, so.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So in closing, I want to open the floor to you to share anything and everything that you have going on in your personal practice or on your website that you want to share with the audience as resources or projects or just ways that they can stay in touch with you.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I am most active on Instagram. I am Krystal CJ. My website, my personal website, krystalcjackson.com, it is morphing right now because it used to be my personal blog, but that's where I share my podcast episodes. So I have a podcast, Evolving with Krystal J, and we talk a lot about just evolution and how are we understanding ourselves. I do share my personal stories. I have guests who also talk about how they are caring for themselves as they are evolving, and it's growing, and I hope everybody can take a listen whenever you get a chance. I also have my coaching program, and it's called Simply Being You, and that's where I help people to really, and this is outside of the therapy room. This is not therapy. I want to be clear about that, but this is giving people a time and intentional, like weekly sessions to be able to help them to prioritize themselves, avoid burnout, and really begin to enjoying their life again. And then the other thing that I'm working on is I'm going to launch pretty soon my therapy journal. I really find benefit in documenting our reflections while we're going through the therapy process. And so I will have that listed. It's on my website now, but it will be available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other retailers pretty soon. So,
oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Thank you so much, Krystal, for sharing all of your wealth of knowledge and just information. I'm inspired. I hope and I know and trust that my audience will also love this episode. So thank you so much. And I will include all of the links to everything that Krystal just mentioned in the show notes of this episode. Make sure you support, buy the journal, listen to the podcast, do all the things we need to support Black women, Black therapists, especially. Like, we need to just elevate their voices. So thank you
yes.
so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you. This was a great time. I very much appreciate it.
Yay, you're welcome. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.